So I'm sharing my screen. You guys are able to see my screen. You guys are able to see.
No, sir.
No. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay. How about now? You guys are able to see my screen.
Yeah, sir.
Okay, perfect. So let's get started. So yesterday we discussed more or less how on the items how you can create the database and how you can rename the databases and also how you can drop the databases. All these three kind of different steps or statements that you executed and practically learned as well, right? And also there are some of the system defined commands which you can use them to see the database size and the schema of the table, and also what is the file allocations of the table on the databases. All those you can see via there are system commands, as I said, that sp underscore space used sp underscore sys objects and is system dot uh, space used. All these things will be there which you can go ahead and check the databases sizes and what is the allocation of spaces, and also how it is the schema of the table and the structure of the tables, how they are defined all in the databases. All these things can be uh, checked and visible via sys commands. And also you can use the command to switch. Use command, there is a use command that is available in the SQL server which you can switch over the database that you are connected on the particular session, right? You can switch from the database that you connected to another database by using the use command and define that particular database name. And also there are different data types that we learned. One is numerical databases, and decimal is nothing but you can define 00.11 or 0.123. All these, any values that you want to insert into any particular column, those columns you can define via decimal. So column name and then the decimal as the data type that you can mention, and you can insert the data as a decimal values, and integer types and varchar and also char and also big int. Mhm. So and there are difference between the main thing that we discussed was what is the difference between varchar and the char. Both are string types, but there is some main critical difference that is there as the variable one and non-variable one. So those details yesterday we discussed. Today we're going to discuss the constraints. What are the different constraints that are available in SQL Server, and what are those and how they are, how you can define the constraints on the databases and the tables, we can learn today, right? There are three different constraint types, broadly divided. One is domain constraints, and then the other one is the integrity constraints, and then the reference. One more is the let me check that. There is one more. There are another is the referential integrity. So there are three types basically. One is the domain integrity constraints, another one is the entity integrity constraints, and then the referential integrity constraint is the third different category which is available as the constraint types. We will learn one by one what are the different types and how it is currently defined and how you can define on a particular table or the databases, right? So domain constraints are nothing but if you see, right, what is constraint? Basically, constraint is the mechanism used to prevent the any invalid data that gets into the table or database, right? Example, there is a column called as the integer type. Okay, you defined a particular column, id column, which is the integer type, but you are trying to insert the varchar type, I mean to the string type of a data, that is invalid data entry, right? That is a constant. You are putting a constant saying that on that particular column, saying that, hey, there is a column that is defined with the integer type, but you are trying to insert string type of a data that is invalid, right? And you are trying to prevent that kind of a data, invalid data entry into the table and the database. So that particular mechanism is called as constraint, basically, right? Constraint. So in normal words also, if you observe, constraint means there is some check, there is some rule that is defined on a particular table or a column or a database level. All these three things you can define on a table or column or at the level of database as well. All these things, whenever you put a certain rule on the data entry part of it, which is invalid as per the business, as per the data that you're going to insert into table, that is called as constraint, right? We can place the constraint at the time of table creation also, or already table is created and data is present, and on top of the data, sorry, already you are created a table and table is existed. On top of the existing table, if there is any data that you're going to insert, before that you want to create a certain checks or certain rules that needs to be performed before getting the data entry into the table. So 2 points you can create an constraint. One is during the table creation, or after the creation of the table you can put a constraint on top of it.
Sorry, I don't understand.
So my my Siri is saying I don't understand, so sick. Sorry, my phone is saying that. So constraint name, it is saying that it is required to. So and once you know about what is constraint and what are the levels you can place the constraint on the tables, and then the table creation part as well, you need to know what is the constraint name. Then what, in order to identify what is the constraint that you put on a table or a column, then there should be, whenever you create a constraint, you should give some name for that. Because later point of a time, if you want to go back and disable or enable that particular constraint, I mean to say, you can created a constraint called as a check constraint. Okay, check constraint is nothing but particular data when you are entering into the table or in the particular column, that should be checked, right? So that checked constraint, you, whenever you are creating a check constraint, you need to give some name for that constraint itself, so that later point there is a requirement, say I don't want to do this check on this particular table and the column, then I need to go back and disable that. So how you can disable? Only if there is a particular name that has been defined for that particular constraint name, then only you can identify and disable that, right? So whenever you are going to create a constraint on the table or a column or at the database level, you should give the constraint name for that, right? Later point you can enable that, or you can disable that, or you can drop that constraint as well. And whatever the name that you give, it should be unique, it cannot be duplicated. Example, today on one particular table you created a constraint abc, okay, and tomorrow there is another constraint that you want to create on another table, right? You cannot give a same abc constraint name on the table or another table whatever you create, because that should be unique to that database. It should be abc underscore d, you can give some other name, but you cannot give abc. If you try it, it will give an error out, say that there is already constraint name that is present in the database saying that abc, which is already present. You cannot give the duplicate names for the constraint. Okay, and sql server provides the, if you are not creating your own names, the sql server automatically gives the unique name format, what format you need to define a constraint with a uniqueness. So that also it will give automatically. So you understood what is the constraint and what is the meaning of the constraint and what are the levels that you can implement the constraint on the table, whether it can be during the creation of the table or after creating the table as well. Depends on the data which you want to insert into table, right? And always you should give the constraint name. It should be unique, and if you are not giving that, it automatically database will create and give the ask you to follow the format to define the constraint name. That is called short form. If you, this is the syntax kind of a stuff which you need to follow to create the constraint name. So you guys understood, and there are three types of the constraint. I will take a pause if there are any issue, I mean if there are any questions that you need to understand what is, I mean whatever we discussed so far.
Yes.
Okay, silence, I will take it as an no questions. Let's move ahead. What are the different types of the constraint that are available in SQL Server? As I said, there are three broadly categorized constraints in the SQL Server. One is domain integrity constraint. Okay, when domain means a particular column, it should be domain specific. I mean to say, so a particular column, id column is there, then you are specifically saying to that particular column that it cannot have any not null values. That is called as domain integrity constraint. Basically on top of the columns, before entering any data at the during the creation of the table itself, you are saying that these are my integrity checks, data integrity checks based on the domain itself that needs to happen. Those are called domain integrity constraint, and there are three different types of the domain integrity constraint on the present in the SQL Server. One is not null constraint, and check constraint, and default constraint. We will understand what is each and individual constraint that are how it behaves in the while you are entering the data into the table as well, right? In a broad manner you can understand not null means, for example, there is one column present. In that column you are already defined integer, not integer type as a data type, and you are putting a constraint saying that not null, right? So while you are creating a table itself, at that time the it makes the understanding while you are entering the data, it is never ever allow you to input any data which is the null data, right? Id column is there, you cannot enter any null values for it. Definitely any some value you have to have input into that particular column, otherwise it will throw that integrity check will constraint will throw an error saying that there is a constraint that is present in the table on that particular column, not null. You cannot enter any null values into the column because the constraint is already placed. Okay, we will see the error how it behaves as well. And check constraint example, there is a column called salary, right? So I do not want to have a salary column which is integer or a money type of a data type, and you have a business rule that there should not be any employee whose salary more than 1 lakh, right? If that is the rule that is put on the business from the business side, then when you are creating a table and creating a column itself, there is a column called employee, sorry, table called employee. Under the employee table there is a column called salary. In that there is an integer, and you created a check constraint say that salary always should be less than 1 lakh. If you put that constraint while you are creating a table itself, then if you are trying to insert any value more than 1 lakh to that particular column for that particular table, it will throw error that there is a check constraint that is available on this database and the table where you cannot insert more than 1 lakh if you are trying to insert more than 1 lakh value. Okay, so that's how the check constraint work. And there is a default. What is default? Default means if there is a table and the column that is present, and you define the default value as 100 to that column, then whether you while you are inserting a data into that particular table and the column, you need not to pass any value. Without passing any value itself, automatically that particular column and that particular row will be inputted with the value called 100, because while you are creating a table itself you defined a default column value as 100. Okay, so this is all theoretical things which I explained you, and we will get into the practically as well. And there are two different types of entity integrity constraints also: unique and primary key. So what is unique key? Unique key is always a column which is created with a unique constraint that indicates that you should always input a value with the unique values. You cannot you cannot insert any duplicate values into that particular column. And primary key is also primary key column. What is the difference between primary key and unique key? That is very important interview question that usually people will ask for any fresher. So what is primary key? Primary key is also, it will allows all the unique values only into the table and the column, but it will also not allow any null values into that column. The only difference between unique key and primary key is it will both are not allows any duplicate values. It will allow only the unique values in both the cases, but only the difference is primary key never ever allows the null values at all along with the uniqueness, but unique key will allow all the null only the unique values, but it will allow single null value as well. It will allow null value, single not null value will be only the difference is it will allow one not null value, one null values, not null value, one null value it will allow, but primary key that also it will not allow. Yeah, there should not be any duplicate values as well as null values, both will not be allowed in primary key. It should be unique. And unique will be having always unique values but can have one null value. That is the only difference. And the last one is referential integrity. Referential integrity, there is a foreign key and then the check relationship. So foreign key, it creates the relationship between one table to another table via foreign key. So I will explain you how it works as well. In check constraint, already I just mentioned that it will check whether that particular data is allowed to insert the value into that column or not. Okay, let's create a table. You understood, right? Theoretically, what are all these things? Now let's get into the practical mode. How we can implement the constraint and see whether these constraints are allowed or not. All these things we can see. So we are creating a table, employee test table, and it is employee number. There is a integer type, and it is identity, and it is primary key I am defining. Okay, there is one more concept called identity. So what is identity? Identity is, example, there is a employee number column which you created as an integer type and you are mentioning it as an identity. Identity, whenever you mention identity, it will start from whenever you insert a employee number 1 and first name ABC, last name GEF, hire date so and so, date, salary so and then the city you mentioned, and you insert a particular row, right? When you insert, the SQL server itself will create one more column such as identity in the and mention that for that particular row it will give a number as 1. And when you insert a second row, it will give second row it will give a number as 2. Likewise, as and when you start inserting the records into the table, the identity value will be get incremented as the unique values. So what is the advantage of that, right? So whenever you are creating a table and it should be unique, you can maintain the serial numbers as well, and you can create that serial number via identity, and also you can change that identity levels also. I will tell you what is the identity and how you can create. Right now you are creating a table with a employee number, integer, and identity, and also you are mentioning primary key. when a, this is a syntax. When you are creating a table and you are creating a column employee number with the identity and then the primary key, when you are defining a primary key, so you defined a primary key set on this employee number. That means the your employee number column in the employee test table is the primary key column, right? The what is the meaning of it? Meaning of it is, the whenever you are inserting a table into employee test table, you cannot primary key column employee number cannot allow you to insert any duplicate values, one thing, and also it will not allow you to enter any null values as well. Both it will not allow, as it is a primary key column. And next column is first name, last name, hire date, salary, right? In the when I am creating a salary, I am one more constraint that I am implementing here. What is the implementation that I did is salary column, which is a integer data type. Here I am defining the check constraint. What is the check constraint that I am telling to implement while I am creating the table? Saying that the salary column, which is the integer data type, should not allow any salary values which is more than 10,000. It should be always less than 10,000. That is my check constraint that I am implementing while I am creating a table, right? If I say like this while I'm creating a table itself, that means that you will never ever allow you to insert any values into this table for the salary column which is more than 10,000. That's the rule of it. That's the constraint that you are putting on the table itself. And one more constraint that I am implementing, city for the city column, which is the varchar 10. For default I'm setting as a Bangalore. For all the employees, whoever I am getting an entry into this employee test table, should be always default values Bangalore. There is no other location that you cannot define to that those employees, because all the company itself is located in Bangalore. Whoever joins to this company which is there in Bangalore, by default, that's likewise I'm defining a default value as the Bangalore. So, and also observe that the first name, last name column, which is the varchar 30 type, I've defined these columns as the not null. So I'm saying that all the different constraint types which I discussed, I'm implementing here. One is I'm implemented the identity. I will show you how the identity works after execution of this table. And also I defined this primary key column also on this employee number. And first name, last name, I'm defining the not null check constraint, right? It cannot, I mean, this meaning, the meaning of this is first name, last name cannot insert any null values. And hire date is a general one. Salary, I'm put a check constraint saying that salary should not be get inserted more than 10,000. And the last one, city column, I'm default, I'm setting the value as Bangalore, right? So let's create this. I will show you. So I'm not connected to any database. Let me connect to database. So commands, okay, it what executed in master. I do not want to execute in master. Let's execute this in my local, or not my local. Let me put that into school, right? So let's execute this. So the table is got created, right? Let's check it out. When the table got created, what are all the things it got created, right? So let's execute sp help on this particular table which I created. So my, when you created, I told you the identity column will be created because the employee number is defined with the identity and primary key, right? So since it is this particular employee number defined as identity, it, the SQL server will create one more different column, that is identity column, to define the serial number for all the rows that got entry into this table, is what I told as identity. And primary key, it will never ever allow you to enter any duplicate values. Also, it will never ever allow you to enter any null values. So let me check this whether identity is created or not. So sp help on that particular table. If I do like that, so it gives you, if you see, right, employee test is the table name which is created by user so and so date, right? And if you observe, right, employee number, first name, last name, hire date, salary, city, all the columns are created. And types are whatever the types I mentioned: integer type, varchar, varchar, and integer and varchar. And also lengths, whatever the lengths that I mentioned while I'm creating a table, 30, 30, 30, all these things I mentioned. And if you see, right, city mentioned as varchar 10, that is also come as a 10. That is a length type, right? And one more curious and very important to know as, so employee number, which is the primary key, right? Primary key column, I said that it will never ever allow you to enter any null values to that particular column, right? So if you see the null label no for employee number, because that employee number column defined as the primary key. As I said, primary key column never ever allow you to insert any null values. Also it will never allow you to insert any duplicate values. So that's why null label it shows as no. And if you observe, while I'm creating a table, first name and last name I specifically mentioned as a not null for these two columns. That's why the null label is showing as a no for those two columns as well, right? So that's the understanding that you need to know. And the other thing, hire date, salary and city, I am not mentioned anything as the not null or anything, any primary key or anything. Default, when you are not mentioning anything as the not null constraint on any particular column, default SQL server say that it yes for the nullable. That means you can insert a null values into hire date, salary and city, because you are not mentioned anything specifically not null. So whenever you are not mentioning specifically as the not null to any columns, by default SQL server takes it as the nullable column. So that's how these things are. These three columns will allow the null values into those columns. Okay. So that's what you can understand, right? Now you understood how you can create the constraint and how it will shown up in the database and tables on the columns. All these three things you saw. One more thing I told you, employee number, there is a column which is defined as the identity. If you see, right, there is one more thing that is shown up, employee number 110, seed is 1, increment is 1, right? And it is put a identity notification to employee number itself, because I mentioned here employee number integer data type identity seed 10. What is the meaning of seed 10? Sorry, seed 11, right? Okay, what is the meaning of 11? That means this is how it is, to make you understand, right? 1 comma 1, this is seed, and then the increment, which column? Emp underscore number, right? So for emp number, whenever you start inserting a data into employee test table, right, you first insert it, right? And second row you insert it, right? And third row you insert it. So when you start inserting row by row like this, the when you insert a first row, the seed would be 1. Okay, seed would be 0, or it will start from 1, and it will, when you insert the second value, second row, the seed would be 1 plus 1. That means increment, it takes what is, how much increment it should do? 1 plus 1. What is the earlier one? 1, right? It starts from 1. From which value you want to start is the seed. Okay, so you think it as identity. Whenever you define an identity, it is nothing but you want to give us some serial number or a sequence number for the rows that you're gonna insert into table. That is the basic understanding, right? And second thing, how that serial number should assign to the rows that I'm going to insert into table, that is second part, right? So how it has to assign the serial number? Based on the seed and increment. Okay, if I mention the seed number as a 1 here, that means my serial number always start from the 1. And if I give an increment as the 1 for that particular seed, then always it should increment whenever the next row gets inserted into table, always increment the identity value by 1 only. That means 1 plus 1, how much? 2, right? Similarly, third row inserted, 2 plus 1, 3. When the fourth row got inserted, then 3 plus 1, 4. Fifth row inserted, it will give you identity value as 4 plus 5. But in case of little bit change here now, if I give, when I creating the identity column, I little change also. What I will do, I will say that my seed number would be 15. Start the my serial number assignment from the 15. Then I, if that is the requirement, my I have to mention the identity seed column value as 15, so that my serial number starts from 15. And one more requirement is, always the second row, third row, when it gets inserted into table, the increment should happen by 2, not by 1. 2, 3, 4, based on your requirement. But in my case, I'm just showing you an example as, if I give like by 2, in this case, when the first row gets inserted into this table, right, the identity values start from 15, because the seed is defined with 15. And increment, when the second row gets inserted, the value of identity will be 17, because 15 plus increment value would be 2, right? 15 plus 2, which is nothing but 17. When the third row gets inserted into table, 17 plus 2 would be 19, and then corresponding 19 plus 2 would be 21, 21 plus 2 would be 23. Like this, your identity values will be get serialized based on your seed and increment. You understood, right? Whenever you define a column with identity based on your seed and increment value which you gonna define, you can define like this along with this identity, right? You can mention like this, you can mention like this, you can mention like 15, like 15 comma 3, whatever. Based on this seed and increment value, your assignment of the serialized number for that identity column would be decided. So that's how it works, right? And how you want to see what are all the constant that is present in the SQL server, then there is a sys command that is available. Select star from sys dot check constraint. If I run this, it will show us what are all my constant that are defined on the table. So in my case, I showed you, I already salary column. Okay, let me go back to SP help, right? So I explained you identity and the seed and increment also. So you also created a primary key, right? Whenever you create a primary key, it will give you what is my primary key here. If you see here, right? Employee number table already, which is employee number column, which is created on this table, I defined it as a primary key column. So if you see the last constraint types, it will show in the constraints only. In the constraint type, the third row, if you see, right, primary key clustered, and SQL server by default it gave some name to that constraint name. I already told you, the SQL server, when you are not specifying any constraint name, it will default give some, generate some name for that constraint. So in this case, and it follows the some naming convention also. What is the naming convention that followed? PK primary key underscore emp test is the table name, some number, unique number it will generate, so that it will not be duplicated. The constraint name always should be unique. So in this case, primary key and the primary key name, constraint name, and also if you see, right, what is the column that is created as the primary key? Employee number. It will show like that. And also I created a default constraint also, right? A default constraint I created on which column? City column. If you see, right, default on column city, and constraint name also it is defined here. And what is the value of that constraint? Default value Bangalore. That will also show up, right? Everything you can see. And also the other constraint which you created was check constraint, right? Check constraint on salary column, which should not be more than 10,000. If you see, right, here check constraint on the sal column and constraint name and also it defines less than 10,000. It cannot be more than 10,000. What is the constant value that is defined on this column? Less than 10,000. So when you do the sp help underscore on the table name, and when you create a table, you can see all the constants that are defined on the table, and also you can see any identity column, how it is created on the primary key column, check constant, default, all the values you can see at a one go, one place. You can see everything, right? So you saw, you created a table with created a primary key, not null, and also check constant, you default. If you do sp help on the table, it will show all the details, what are my constants that I am created on the table. Clear? Very much clear. Let's, I also explained you how the identity works and how the seed and increment. What is the meaning of seed and increment? I told you. And what are my default constant? If I run that sys.default constant name, it will show you the default constant that is being created on city column. It will show, right? See here. It is showing that default constant. The definition is Bangalore. On which column it is get created? It created on city column. It will show that also, right? And also if I want to see what are my foreign keys that I am created, it will show what are the foreign keys that currently I am not created any foreign key. That's why it is not showing anything. Guys, you are clear?
Yeah, sir.
Okay. So let's create a one more foreign key also on the other table. So I am creating one more table, which is employee result table. In this same employee number, identity, primary key, blah blah blah, first name not null, last name not null, constraint here, foreign key name I am all constraint name I am already defining, fkemp, foreign key employee number, right? References employee test. What is the meaning of it? So what I am trying to do here is, whatever the, there are two tables that is present in the database, example employee test and another one is employee result also, right? So there is a column called employee number in uh, employee number in the employee test table, right, which is the primary key in the employee test table. But when it comes to the employee result table, the employee number, which is the primary key, right, which is the primary key, will be referenced. This, I mean to say, employee result table, whatever the foreign key employee number is there, this table, this column will be foreign key relationship with the employee test table. I mean to say, basic understanding what you can think of is, there is a employee table, okay, just meaning of, let me show you, emp table, and there is a department table, okay, department, think like this. So employee table, right? Here, how employee to department is relationship. So whoever the employees are there, employee id will be there, employee name, only two columns are there, think like that, okay. And then in the department, you will be having a department id and a department name, right, d name, correct. And now understand this much only, and employee id is primary key for employee table, primary key is the employee id, right, in employee table, okay. Similarly, in the department table, dept id is your primary key, okay. And employee id 1 will be there here, and name will be abc, right. And same department id d1 is here, and department name is ec, right. Now I want to see, if my requirement is, I want to see employee id 1 abc, who is the name of abc, for which department he is working as a lecturer. If I want to see, you cannot see, right? I mean, if you cannot run the query that, my requirement is simple, I want to see employee id 1 abc, who is working in one of the college, but I don't know which department he is working for. But my requirement, I want to know which department also he is working for. If I run the query select star from employee table, it will give you employee id and employee name, but it will never give you the department name and department id which he is working for, right? So, and also if I run the department select star from department, then it will give you d1 ec. It will never ever give you d1 ec who is having a employees that are working under. That details you will never get it, right? So rdbms will comes into the picture. What is rdbms? Relational database management system, right? Employee id in the in the employee table, employee id is the primary key column, but in order to build the relationship between employee table to department table, I need to have some relationship between this and this table to this table, right? So example, there is a parents, right? Parents are there, but son is admission. How you will know that this son is the, I mean, who is the parents of this son? How you will know? Some relationship should be there, right? You will name of that particular son, after that that father's son will comes into the middle name, and then the address of that particular family will comes into the last, right? Similar way, some reference should be there in the tables as well, right? How you gonna relate to this table to this table? Whatever the employee id is there here as the primary key will be, when you are creating a department table, you can create a column called employee id also, which is the, create this column as the foreign key to employee table. So when you created a employee id column in department table, right, it employee id which is present in employee table is the foreign key. When it comes here in this table, this is the foreign key. So this is established the relationship between employee table to department table via the prime, which is employee id which is the primary key in employee table will be converted into employee id in the department table as the foreign key. So when you enter d1 ec, you can mention that employee id 1 here, right? When you write a query with the join conditions, you can establish the relationship between employee id which is the common between these two tables, build the relationship as the primary to foreign key relationship, and gets the result out of that. Say that employee id 1 abc who is working in so and so college will be working under department called d1 ec. That's the relationship you can establish between two tables via foreign key relationship, right? So when you create a table, you mention a particular employee number who, which is the primary key in the employee test table, which is referencing into employee test table. That's what you are mentioning here. When you create an employee result table, the employee number which is the primary key in the employee test table will be foreign key in employee result table. That's the identification. Again, you can run the sp help command, got successfully executed. Sp help on the this particular employee result, it will show you the foreign key results also. I will show you. So I'm running employee result, it will show you the foreign key constraint now on the employee test table. See here, if you see constraint type foreign key employee, which is I mentioned as the particular emp name itself, it I mentioned like that. If you see, right, fk underscore emp is the name that I given to that constraint, which I am created as the reference key to the employee test table, right? So it is already showed you fk emp on the employee number and referencing to the employee test table, which is present on the school database. That's how you can build the relationship between one table to another table, right? So just a quick round of understanding. Now in the employee test table, so there is already Anil, I already mentioned primary key columns, right, for employee number and first name, right? So basically what is the understanding? It never ever allow you to insert any null values to these columns, right? So let's try that. if I try to insert a employee test values, first two columns I'm trying to insert a null, the primary key column and then the first name. For those two columns I'm trying to insert a null values. It should not allow you to insert. And also I'm trying to insert a salary as the 25,000. It will also not allow you because I mentioned only less than 10,000, right? And I default already mentioned Bangalore, but I'm trying to insert as the RNR. Will it allow you? Let's try it out. What's the error it will give? See, cannot insert the null values into first name table, first name column, because column does not allow you the null values. So, because you are already defined a constraint on the first name saying that it never allow you to insert any null values, but you are trying to insert some null values, which is against the rule which you are created, right? So it is not allows you. And also in the second place, you are trying to insert first name and last name. And one more thing, first name and last name you are trying to insert, and also after that null values. Sorry, primary key column you are trying to insert some varchar values. Employee number is an integer type and it is a primary key, right? And you are trying to insert some string values which is against to the rule. And also your last name you are trying to insert null values which is against to again the rule because you are created null not null column. Let's try and execute again, it will show you the error. Oh, sorry, it got inserted. How it got inserted? Okay, sorry, I misread that. One more thing. So it will always your salary greater than 10,000, not less than 10,000. It's a greater than 10,000. It will allow you the salary more than 10,000. That's why it got inserted, right? So if you see here, right, Anil, first name, last name, you inserted a value. Let's check it out. Run that select statement and see whether it got inserted or not. See here, employee number 2, which is primary key. And one more identification here. So this is a good catch. You have to understand this. See here, I'm not passed any values to first column, employee number. I'm not passed any values when I'm inserting a value, right? Even though I'm not inserted any value here, it got inserted as a 2, number 2, because I when you since you are defined a employee number which is the primary key column, and also you defined as an identity column. When you define the identity column, SQL Server automatically, I told you, it will give you the serial number for those rows, right? So ideally for the employee number, as I said, when you inserted the first row, try inserted the first identity column, first identity value will be inserted as a 1. But since to the failure of null value, it doesn't insert it. But when you are inserted a second row, it gives you the employee number 2, which is the identity value, and the first name, last name, which is not null, which is rightly, it has a values, Anil and Kumar, both are inserted. And the third one is, what is that? Yeah, third one is higher date. It is a not null values, you can insert a null values to that. And salary greater than 25,000, so 10,000, it is also got inserted. So hence it is able to show the data. And you specifically mentioned the city value as a RNR. That we, whenever you mention some values by yourself, when you are inserting a column with a default check constraint, it will allow you to insert the value. But if you are not inserted any values and you mention as a default, when you are inserting a value, it will take Bangalore. That's the main understanding. So in the other case, now you try to insert 5,000, it will show an error that your salary must be greater than 10,000. That's the error I'm going to get. See here, insert statement conflicted with the check constraint, conflicted in the database, which is school database on the salary column, because I'm specifically mentioned your salary should be greater than 10,000. It cannot be less than 10,000. That is the check constraint I put on that particular table. That's why it got an error, right? And the last one, default one, how you can check? So you passed the first name, last name, and then the higher date and the 35,000, which is greater than 10,000, all good. And you are, instead of mentioning your own city, you mentioned as a default. So what is the default value that is given to that particular table creation? Bangalore. So even though you are not passing as a Bangalore, you mentioned it as a default, it will take it as a Bangalore and it will insert. That's the understanding of default constraint, right? Let's run this. And also primary key will be get inserted with identity value greater than, see, 2 4. Fourth value it got inserted, Guru, last name Teja, hire date whatever the data that I gave, salary is 35,000, city, right? City I mentioned default value is Bangalore when I'm created the table, that's why it is showing as a Bangalore. You guys understood? So what you guys understood is, you are able to understand what are the constraint, different types of a constraint, how you can create the constraint, not null constraint, check constraint, default constraint, unique key constraint. Also, you can I can show you an example, but I'm not added here. And then the primary key and how you can define a primary key, and identity also I explained you, foreign key and check constraint. All these constraint that you learned today. Okay. Okay, guys. I have to jump to other call. Thank you all. I will just pass on all these details. Thank you.
ಮೇಡಮ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಆಯ್ತಾ?
Hmm.
ಇವಾಗ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಪ್ರೆಗ್ನೆಂಟ್ ಇರ್ತೀರಲ್ಲ, ಇವಾಗ ಅವ್ರ ದೇವಸ್ಥಾನಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಕ್ಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ರಶ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಗಲ್ಲ.
Hmm.
ಹ್ಮ್, ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ವಿ. ಈಗ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಇದ್ದಲ್ಲೇ ದೇವ್ರನ್ನ ಕಾಣೋಣ ಅಂತ ಸ್ವಾದಿಷ್ಟ ಚಕ್ರ ಮಾಡ್ಸಿದ್ವಿ. ನಾನು ಹೋಗ್ತಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರೆಗ್ನೆಂಟ್ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲಿ